Deathpixie disclaimer. This video was originally recorded in September 2024. There is swearing and profanity. Sources are listed in the description. This video is not monetized. Any ads you see provide revenue to the hosting site, not the creators. If you made it this far, geez, you have a lot of patience.
Deathpixie dancing on the lip of madness!
Welcome to Shitty PowerPoint Theater. Dignity not included.
Yummy, yummy. Bring on the king. Hail to the king.
I cannot deal with you. So he led Canada through the Great Depression and the Second World War.
Yes, he did.
He was with the Liberal Party. You can tell he had 3 terms that were not consecutive. We'll get to what this is, by the way, later. He never married and had no children, but he did have a very close friend who died in 1901.
Yeah, his name was Arthur Meighan and...
Sorry.
No, Henry Albert Harper. We'll get to him. Now, Mackenzie King
was actually a really, really good prime minister.
Yeah, but what I'm also going to say is, you thought that the Great Compromiser had a lot of stuff?
Oh, yeah.
I just want to point out, look at how long these terms were.
Yeah.
So, throughout World War II, he mobilized Canadian money, supplies, and volunteers while boosting the economy and maintaining morale on the home front. Canada's economic management was generally judged the most successful of all countries engaged in the war. His press censorship actually ended with the hostilities, unlike with World War I. And a lot of that censorship is because you don't want certain plans being revealed. You don't want to jeopardize anything going on. Also, there's another reason behind that as well, but we've got a lot to get through. He laid the foundations for the Canadian welfare state and increase in labor protections. So we've got family allowances, which was Canada's first universal welfare program. The inaugurated system of old age pensions based on need, National Housing Act, National Employment Commission, introduced unemployment insurance, passed the National Housing Act to improve housing affordability, different part of the National Housing Act, subsidized medical services in provinces, Fair Wages and 8 Hours Day Act was introduced, Industrial Relations and Disputes Investigations Act was passed, which was to safeguard the rights of workers to join a union. And then requiring employers to recognize the unions chosen by their employees. Federal Home Improvement Plan, Federal Unemployment and Agricultural Assistance Act, Youth Training Act, Vocational Training Coordination Act, and a wide range of reforms. Canada as a separate nation from Britain and the US. You see this with the expansion of the Department of External Affairs, the British Commonwealth Air Training Program Agreement. He actually helped found the United Nations. Canadian Parliament was to make the final decision on going to war when it was concerning World War II. Yeah. There was a Halibut Treaty, and how that was negotiated set a new precedent for Canada's role amongst the British domains. Clarified the Governor General of the Dominion, clarified that role. The Canadian Citizenship Act, Reciprocal Trade Agreement, successfully negotiated Newfoundland's entry into Confederation. He established the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, Trans-Canada Airlines, National Film Board of Canada, nationalized the Bank of Canada to a Crown Corporation, established the precursor to Air Canada. He increased the powers of provincial governments by transferring ownership of Crown lands and subsoil to the governments of Manitoba, Alberta, and Saskatchewan. Dealt with espionage revelations of Soviet cipher clerk Igor Konsetskov, sorry about that, full-scale research into nuclear physics, Bullfair Declaration, appointed Karine Wilson as the first female senator in Canadian history. Women are declared as persons in 1929.
Finally! It only took how many years?
I know. Modified the Immigration Act to allow former subjects of Austria-Hungary to once again enter Canada. The federal vote. In 1948, the federal vote is open to Canadians regardless of provincial exclusions. There is a Universal Declaration of Human Rights adopted as well, which eliminates race as a reason to deny the right to vote. So now, Japanese, Chinese, and other Asian Canadians can now vote federally no matter what province they live in.
Yeah. Before we go into the pros and to give you a bit of a break, this man is the foundation of modern Canada.
Yep.
We talk a lot about the classics. This is the precursor to the modern era. It doesn't matter what you think of him. Left-leaning, right-leaning, I think you can tell what Miri and I are. The fact of the matter is, this man put a lot of things into practice that I argue that we as a society take for granted today. And he needs to be given his flowers for that. As much as I joke about him and Arthur Meighen having a torrid love affair, which totally did happen, no, I've got nothing but respect for Mr. Mackenzie King. Tremendous amount of stuff. Regardless of how you feel about it, it shaped Canada as a nation into what it is. And it did things that, sure, now we take for granted, but at the time, incredibly progressive.
Yeah, very.
Yeah.
Some cons, we've got Customs Department scandal. The one is Benharnio scandal. There we go. Conscription. I will note he delayed it as long as he could.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is, this is a big part of why the World Wars were World Wars. It forced the hand. You had to be providing certain people, but also as it became more knowledgeable about what was going on during World War II, it just turned into this point of, this is beyond a disagreement between a couple countries. Yeah. This is a crisis that we all need to step into. So he did have a slow reaction at the beginning of the Great Depression, which meant he did get voted out, but he got voted back in and then took action. So he did run deficits. However, those deficits were according to the wishes of his party members. He would have actually tried to equalize the budget otherwise.
Yeah. Now, to be fair, even in on that, he was doing this during the time of the Great Depression.
Yeah.
So the wishes of his party members were to run deficits purely for the constituents' sake. Mm-hmm. As much as it is a con, we do have to put that little disclaimer in there. There is a lot of intricacies within that.
Yeah. All of these programs that he was doing during the Great Depression was the result of having those deficits. Deficits. It's
while those deficits are bad, are they a necessary evil? Who knows? I know what I think on it. Mary, I'm sure, knows what she thinks on it.
Well, when you're facing with people dying of starvation potentially.
Yeah.
He thought that Hitler would travel to good, not evil. That is frequently cited as a con for him. I think that's missing the fact that many people thought Hitler would actually go to good, and then Hitler didn't.
Many people thought Mr. Hitler was very, very good for certain people.
Yeah.
Especially at the time.
Apparently he went full down the train. He was going to go down.
Okay, here we go. Okay, two roads diverge into a narrow wood. One leading to good, one leading to, the fun place with a rainbow at the end.
he did refuse. There was a ship of 900 Jewish immigrants fleeing Germany that was refused by many countries, including Canada. It was refused by the US and Cuba. This decision was especially influenced by the Quebec public. So here we see an example of making a compromise that may not be the good choice. But I wanted to note that he, this wasn't him acting alone. This was him input of people on not accepting that vote. I do want to point out, and we'll get into this when we talk about Pierre Elliott Trudeau, for a lot of Quebecois people, they were under the impression that World War II was just some countries disagreeing and that it was about the leaders. There wasn't knowledge about what was actually happening, in particular the Holocaust. So Pierre Elliott Trudeau actually took like 4 or 5 years to just travel the world at one point in his life. And that's where he actually, got perspective, I think. And it's an example. I think it was a very good example of, going out, meeting people, expressing your worldview. Keep in mind, he didn't stay in high-class hotels. He was actually staying in hostels and acting as a backpacker and getting to know people. And that was kind of when it was sort of like, oh, we were wrong about this. Like, this was beyond what we thought. So I will say that for perspective, but it is still a con. There was an order in cancel passed. That order in cancel was not specifically targeted at Japanese people, but it did result in the internment camps that Japanese people were kept in Canada. Interestingly, there was the Chinese Immigration Act in 1923, which was also called the Chinese Exclusion Act, but then it was repealed in 1947. So I'd have to look more into it. I think it is an indication of, listening to party members. Maybe? I don't know. But yeah. But you can see just how much he did, especially by how I had to combine things into like categories as well. So yeah. Now let's talk about the man. So if some countries have too much history, we have too much geography.
Is he wrong?
No, that is such a sticking point in Canada. I mentioned it before. It is hard to run elections. It is hard to get resources. It's hard. It's funny, but it's true. He was a big champion for the planning and development of Ottawa. So he really believed in garden neighborhoods. So a lot of the neighborhoods where there are winding streets and trees and green space, that was the result of him, which is quite cool. I don't know, like aesthetics like that in the neighborhood. He is the longest serving prime minister in Canadian history. The longest serving prime minister in Canadian history.
He had breaks, but in total,
yeah. He was dedicated to social reform, but never favored socialism. So there's I just thought it was an interesting thing there. He has the most detailed diaries. His diaries are essentially a logbook for everything he did every day. They are considered essential historical documents in Canada because they covered the Great Depression and World War II and a lot of the decision making at the time. The diary,
and they're really universally viewed as that, Mary?
Yeah.
Viewed.
Oh, dang it. Oh. This is, as you can tell, we do not have money for a copywriter.
No. But now, what I think is interesting to know, and this is just for deathpixie services, his occult beliefs were not known until his diaries were read.
Yep.
And I think if you're going to I think if you're going to base Regina, of course, you know Regina a lot closer than I do, Mary. If you're going to position Regina, I think King is a good place to start for her political views and leanings. But again, I don't know Regina nearly as well as you do. Maybe you've got some perspective I don't. We'll see that as we go forward.
Oh, definitely. He was a modernizing technocrat, and he wanted the Liberal Party to represent liberal corporatism and create social harmony. He's also referred to as the diligent tailor.
Yep.
Now, his occult beliefs were not known until his diaries were read. He is known to have gone to seances frequently, do tarot card readings, to try to speak with his mom and everything like that. It also became known how close he was to his mom, how devastated he was when his mother died. One criticism against him was that he was like a floundering mama's boy. So take that to mean what you will. He never married. He did, however, frequently visit sex workers. Apparently, though, the sex workers and the tarot card readers and the psychics never actually knew who he was. So I don't know how that was pulled off. But again...
Well, you see, there's a conspiracy theory involving Arthur Meighen and Mackenzie King. They would meet up at those brothels. And then, you know what they do.
So, I mentioned his friend and roommate. So, King was quite abrasive personality. It was hard to get to know him, hard to befriend him. So, but he had one friend. In 1901, it was his best friend, Henry Albert Harper. And in 1901, Henry actually died at a skating party. A young woman fell through the ice of the partially frozen Ottawa River, and Henry dove in to save her and actually died doing that. King, in fact, led an effort to raise a memorial to Harper, and it resulted in the erection of the Sir Galahad statue on Parliament Hill. He also published a memoir about his friend called The Secret of Heroicism. So he was very crushed when his friend died. Descriptions of him, there's a fun story about him. So journalist W.A. Hewitt recalled that the city editor of the Toronto News left him in charge one afternoon with instructions to fire King when he showed up. Hewitt was sitting at the editor's desk. King showed up a few minutes later and resigned before he could be told he was fired. There's a quote from historian Jack Granenstein, who says, King's personality was complex. He lacked the charisma of such contemporaries as Franklin D. Roosevelt, Winston Churchill, or Charles de Gaulle. Cold and tactless in human relations, he lacked oratorical skills, and his personality did not resonate with the electorate. He had many political allies, but very few close personal friends. He kept secret his beliefs in spiritualism and use of mediums to stay in contact with departed associates, and particularly with his mother, and allowed his intense spirituality to distort his understanding of Adolf Hitler. In addition, the scholars expressed little admiration for King the man, but offered unbounded admiration for his political skills and attention to Canadian unity. So, a hard person to like. There's a lot of quotes that he has, such as, "Truth never loses its power, even when it is at odds with popular opinion. The strength of a nation lies not in its military might or economic wealth, but in its commitment to justice and equity for all. Once a nation parts with the control of its credit, it matters not who makes the laws." So you can see a lot of his beliefs there. But I have a couple shade for you. His comment that the Prairie Dust Bowl was, quote unquote, part of the U.S. desert, I doubt if it will be of any real use again. Which, not good to say, but holy crap, is that a burn. I've always found that you can control people better if you don't see too much of them. I really believe my greatest service is in the many unwise steps I prevent. And back to Sexy Moose. He studied law and political economy, and he became concerned with issues of social welfare. He went to the University of Toronto, the University of Chicago, and Harvard. He did do a PhD dissertation titled Publicity and Public Opinion as Factors in the Solution of Industrial Problems in Canada. Quite a title, right?
Oh, yeah.
He was an early member and officer of the Kappa Alpha Society. He had a central role in fermenting a student strike, contributed the campus newspaper. He wrote for the Globe, the Mail and Empire, and the Toronto News. He was the editor of the federal government-owned Labour Gazette. He is the only Canadian Prime Minister to have a PhD. Deputy Minister of the Canadian government's new Department of Labour. And he was appointed to investigate causes of and claims for compensation resulting from the 1907 anti-Oriental riots in Vancouver's Chinatown and Japantown. One of the claims for damages was actually from Chinese opium dealers, which led King to investigate narcotics used in Vancouver and British Columbia. And he actually reported that white women were also among opium users, not just Chinese men. So the federal government used the report to justify the first legislation outlawing narcotics in Canada. He was to the House of Commons. He was Minister of Labour under Sir Wilfrid Laurier. He introduced a bill aimed at establishing an 8-hour day on public works, but that was killed in the Senate. He lost a seat and worked for the Rockefeller Foundation briefly, and then he became an industrial consultant. There's a lot about him working with Rockefeller, and him becoming an independent consultation. There is a lot on him. He did rejoin politics. And he attained the prairies with a pro-worker and pro-farmer stride, became prime minister, leader of the opposition, prime minister in a landslide majority, leader of the opposition, prime minister again, and then party leader. He retired and died of pneumonia 2 years later after retirement. His diary was incredibly candid. It went from the time he was an undergraduate until a few days before his death. His memoirs, when they are stacked in a row, span the length of over 7 meters and comprise over 50,000 manuscript pages of typed transcript. His successors, especially Diefenbaker, Pearson, and Trudeau, built the welfare state, which had advanced during the Second World War into the modern cradle-to-grave system that we have today. So Diefenbaker, I will say he was an asshole, but he did care about people. So take that with what you will. Do you have anything else you would like to say?
The Brad would like to contest the fact that the Mackenzie King was an avid pet owner. The Brad does not like dogs, and therefore he views that the Mackenzie King was not an avid pet owner.
The Chad would like to dispute the Brad.
You would.
Being an avid pet owner allows you to be more personable, especially to the Mackenzie King. It's common knowledge that he won several elections because he was a fan of the doggos.
Hey, this is Trapdoor Crabsworth for deathpixie. If you liked our content, please like this video and subscribe. And if you want to see more, just check out our links in the description. Do it. Do it or Miri will kill you.